Live from the American Gulf Coast, it's the Dave Nemo Show.
Oh, and good morning, everybody. I was just thinking of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Byron, Kelchner, Eric, Arnold, Kevin Lindsey on the air right now. Boy, I wish I hadn't have done that. I know Tara's going to pull that video and use it against me, or that audio. Hey, Byron, good morning.
Good morning.
And Eric, good morning.
Good morning, Dave.
And Kevin, thank you for bringing the guys to the show this morning. Good morning to you.
Oh, good morning, Dave. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, earlier, the last hour, has it been an hour already? Last hour, I made a point of saying that not only is today's program about used oil analysis, but it really emphasizes the importance of used oil analysis, because this is not a one-part or a two-part series, but a three-part series. And heck, I don't know, maybe you guys have a fourth or a fifth part, because you can't say too much, Kevin, about the importance and the usability of oil analysis.
Oh, absolutely. You are absolutely right. I mean, it's and like you said, that's one reason there's so many parts to this, right? It is an important part of maintenance. So.
And we're going to dive in right now. The phones are open too, of course, 615-292-6366. Kind of got 3 points here. Hopefully we'll get to all three, but sometimes not, because we're going to dig in a little bit deeper than most. We're going to continue the checklist of things that oil analysis can do for me. So we'll kind of get into the what else's here this morning. But what do you see when you get the analysis results? So what do we need to know? Like, is that number, is it like golf? The higher number is not good and the lower number is, or is it like football where the higher number is good and the lower number is not? And then can you really diagnose some engine problems with oil analysis? And you guys are going to walk through those things. So, Eric, I guess we ought to start with what we see, and can we believe what we see, and how much do I need to know before I can really look at this and make some sense out of it?
Yeah, that's really what it is, making sense out of it. So when you get the oil analysis results, sometimes it's a little bit deflating, because you get it and it's essentially a piece of paper with a bunch of numbers on it. It doesn't have, photos, or sometimes it might have some graphs or something like that. But generally, you get via email usually a PDF with your results, and the key is taking those numbers and understanding what they mean. A good report should help spell that out for you. And typically an oil analysis report, it's got 3 sections. One of the sections is, this is what the lab uses to compare your oil to what it should be. So it's what you say was there. You tell us what kind of oil it was, what grade it was, what was the date of service, and really important, how long was that oil in service? How many miles or hours was that oil in operation? That's an important variable. But also, what kind of engine was it, for example? What's the make, the model, serial number, what kind of fuel are you using? Information about your truck, your VIN, all that, that's really good for warranty claim issues anyway. And also your information, make sure that's right so that the lab can reach you. But, the test results themselves are typically just numbers that will tell you how much you have in there for wear metals or the additive levels of your oil. A really important one would be viscosity or any contaminants. Contaminants could be coolant, dirt, fuel, water. And then the last of those 3 sections would be the comments and recommendations. A good lab should provide a little bit of guidance based on what those results mean, because they shouldn't expect everybody to understand how to read one of these reports. And if you do work with some labs, they might include some generic graphs. Some might even have a reference which would show what the new oil should look like. That way you can see how much it's changed. The key to that is you really need to have more than one sample. You need to be able to see how much it changed. So one sample on its own can tell you a little bit, But if you've got 3 or 4 and you can see how things have changed over time, that's really valuable to you. And another very important piece I shouldn't leave off, when you get your report, it should have information on how to contact the lab, an address, a phone number. And my opinion is, no matter what, you've paid for this analysis. You've paid for these results. All the hard parts are done. You've got the oil sample. You have it sent into the lab. If you get that report back and you don't understand it, you have every right to call the lab. Just say, hey, can you help me understand this? I don't know what this means. Make sure you get some value out of it, because that's what you paid for, and ultimately you're trying to keep your engine healthy.
I'm going to do something in reverse that I always do on Highway to Health. And yesterday I actually used the example of oil analysis and blood work that you get from the doctor. You go in there, they take the blood, and you get the results sometimes later that afternoon around here, but in a couple of days. And you get all of these numbers, and then you got to do all of the research to find out, well, what does this mean? And you think, well, I'll remember that, and then you don't, and things like that. So it's sort of like those parallels, between the truck and the human body. I always try to make, but that's what you laid out, Eric, is a perfect example of that.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I don't even pretend to understand what my blood reports work or mean. I count on the follow-up with the doctor. That's why I try to do it beforehand, because if I'm late, I know I'm going to have to go back later.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Kevin, I want you to jump in here too, of course.
Well, no, I mean, I everything Eric's talking about, and and that's a great analogy, and I know we used that. I think last time you guys were on, we talked about that, the correlation between blood work and, that oil analysis basically being the same thing, right? So, I think that's a great way of explaining it, because that is really what it is. And sure, like Eric said, you get all of these numbers, but what do they really mean? You call that lab that did that stuff, that I think in most cases, they'd be more than happy to help you understand those numbers that you're looking at, so. But I was going to ask if with all that said, what else can the oil analysis and stuff do for us, Byron? Do you know? I mean, is there a lot more that could be done?
Well, I tell you what, Kevin, they pay me to hopefully know that answer, I guess. I'll say, but one thing I'll kind of say, and I'm just going to continue right on that train that both Dave talked about and you did as well, Kevin, is it's going to kind of go back to that health analogy. Is it's a really good point of confirmation, or think of it as like that second opinion. If something doesn't seem right or something seems off, whether it be your engine, transmission, or a really vital component like that, think about oil analysis as that second opinion. So, if I go to the doctor, maybe I get some unfortunate news, but he's going to say, hey, I think you should get a second opinion. That's exactly what oil analysis really kind of is. And if you suspect that a problem might exist, an oil sample is really relatively inexpensive and easy to get. So I think there's no reason not to do it, right? So it's not like it's very cost prohibitive or anything like that. It's a very good, cheap, simple way to kind of get that second opinion with that. I think the other thing too is, and it often gets overlooked, is other components can be sampled as well. So, where we've really focused mainly on the engine, on these past 3 episodes, is there's other components there that are really vital to going up and down the road and to the key health of your overall equipment, and not just the engine. And those could be things like the transmission, your differentials, your power steering. If you run equipment that has a lot of hydraulics on it as well, that's another thing that could be sampled. And we have some customers that are big Castrol fleet customers that have other parts of our business that have really heavy hydraulic use. So they do a lot of hydraulic sampling. One thing to note with that is, though, is if you're going to be sampling one of those components, it's really key to put that information on the sample label when you're sending that sample in. And the reason for that is those components will test very differently. Obviously, they don't have engine oil in them, transmission fluid, differential gear oil. very different, but those contaminants are going to look a little different as well. So it's really key that we put that on there. One to not be overlooked is the cooling system. Most commercial labs will still process antifreeze and coolant samples, and those can be very useful in the spring or fall. The sample bottle size is usually a little bit larger, but that's a good thing that you can sample as well. And I think one of the great points of to kind of close that out of what it can do for me is when you look at, you have documentation to help you out with warranty coverage, documentation to help you out with resale value. And I think there's a lot of information out there that will show that if somebody really has a really good, long, standardized history of oil analysis and sample results, it really improves their resale value with somebody else that they're going to be kind of getting rid of that equipment to when they've reached its life and they want to pass it on. And then I think the other piece, and we really always talk about it, is it helps you with planning out maintenance. So it really helps you whether you're extending drain intervals or just kind of confirming the drain interval you're at to make sure you're where you want to be. But it really kind of, you want to have it as a planned maintenance and not reactive maintenance. And that's really what we try and do.
Guys, we're going to take a break right here, but before we go into the break, I kind of want to set up something. You've already talked about how to get the sample. There is a proper way to get the sample that you're going to send in. So we won't really go through that. But again, it's sort of like the parallel between getting your blood test done. Sometimes you have to fast for an X amount of time, or sometimes you don't. So the preparation for the sample is important. But when we come back, Byron, is there how do you get I didn't even know that they did analysis on cooling. We've never talked about that ever for coolant samples. So maybe we could talk about, I'm sure there must be a proper way to gather the coolant sample before you send it in. And do a lot. Am I alone on that bus, or is there a bus full of folks out there that don't realize that antifreeze and coolants can be sampled? We'll be right back. Byron Kelchner, Eric Arnold from Castrol, developing lubricants, coolants, and greases that have been part of the heart of numerous technologies on land, air, sea, and in space for over 100 years. Castrol.
Freight is moving at Creek Carrier and Schaefer Trucking. We are growing, and our customers keep growing with us. If you want to be part of a company that appreciates what you do and rewards you for it, you should check out Creek Carrier Corporation. We're looking for safe drivers that have at least 1 year's experience and take their job seriously. Then we reward you with great pay and some real serious benefits. Freight's moving, so check out Creed and Schaefer today. Go to creekcarrier.com and find the right job for you.
You know Castrol for passenger car oil and racing, but did you know that they're in the heavy-duty over-the-road market? Well, Castrol CRB Multi 15W40 and Vecton Long Drain 10W30 are now available at TA Truck Service Centers nationwide. This is the partnership in preventive maintenance. TA Truck Service and Castrol, offering you premium products and performance at great price points every day. Castrol, performance for the long haul, guaranteed.
Got a Lincoln motor and it's really souped up. That Model A body makes it look like a pup. It's got 8 cylinders and uses them all. Got overdrive, it just won't stall. With a 4-barrel carb and dual exhaust with 411 gears, you can really get lost. Got safety tubes, but I ain't scared. The brakes are good, the tires are
that song needs a little analysis. Byron Kelchner is with us. He is the Senior Heavy-Duty National Accounts Manager at Castrol, and Field Engineer Eric Arnold, and, of course, Kevin Lindsey, TA Petro, on this edition of Maintenance Matters. So, Byron, you guys have explained, how to get an oil sample. You can review that, too, if you want to, quickly for everybody that may have missed that. But how do you get what's the proper way to get the coolant?
Well, there's some pretty good parallels between the two processes when you do that. So just very quickly, just to kind of highlight about oil analysis when you're doing that, there are a number of ways to do that. We actually have what's the little suction pump. So it's actually called like a vampire pump, and you can kind of take that through the dipstick. There's a long tube that kind of goes down. Most of the time, I think a way a lot of people would be doing that is, as you would be doing a normal oil change anyway, that component is at least warmed up a little bit. You never want to do it cold. And then you may catch some of that oil midstream. So you're not getting, as soon as you crack that, the drain plug out, you're not getting that first little bit. You're going to let it run a little. capture some of that midstream, and then go ahead and put your bottle cap on, and that's the way you do your oil sample. Coolant is basically very similar to that. So what you would want to look for is, of course, you don't want that coolant, up to complete operating temperature. That's going to be extremely hot that way, and you certainly don't want to do that. What you want to do, have some warmth already in that cooling system, so that way that thermostat has opened up and everything's kind of circulating through the system. And then what you would want to do is, at that point, you would want to capture some midstream. So most cooling systems, you're not going to want to take it out of a reservoir tank or anything like that. You may have some contaminants that may just lay there in the bottom, which is not going to give you a very good representative sample of what's actually going on in the system. You would want to do, like, out of a bottom drain, let a little bit run out midstream. That way, in case anything's kind of laying around that bottom drain, it kind of gets flushed out. Capture some midstream in a clean container with that. And really, you want to make sure you have a coolant sample kit for that, because that volume of what they're going to want, oils use around 4 ounces, and coolant's going to be considerably more of what a lab is going to want to do that. The main things is, you want to do, when it has some temperature already in the system, you want to make sure it has a clean container. And by all else, do not dip it out of like a drain pan or a container that maybe you thought, hey, we're going to go ahead and drain it out. When we think it's a clean container and we're going to scoop some out and send it in, you're not going to get a very good sample representative at that point.
Got it. Got one. I'm going to kind of stay on this in this lane just for one more round here, if you don't mind. And Eric, you may know this too. So Byron, Eric, Kevin, jump in. Okay. So we have the vampire pump, and we're going to suck out 4 ounces of oil, and we're doing it properly. In terms of cleanliness and contamination, are you going to use a pump exclusively for coolant? And in other words, you can't use the same pump for each, even though you're going to. Can you clean it enough for that? Kind of help me out here.
Yeah. Well, you can use the same pump because if you do it the right way, the tubing sticks through and just should let the fluid go into the bottle. And then when the pressure is released, the remaining fluid should retreat back down the line. So to answer your question, yes, you can, although it is a best practice to have a separate pump, just in case some gets on the pump. Otherwise, that coolant, those little tiny remnants might get into your oil sample bottle, and then your oil sample will say you have coolant in your oil, and you might be chasing ghosts. It is a good practice. I mean, and you can clean them, but it's a bit of a process.
And before we move on to, and Kevin's going to lead us into the next area about common problems. But Byron, one more thing. I think I heard you say most labs still process antifreeze and coolant samples. Is that what you said? And is there a reason why they're still doing it?
Well, yes, that's true. So they will still, I'm going to say majority of every lab out there is still going to process coolant samples. So the reason they're still doing it is because it's still an important thing to do. Whereas it doesn't get the same amount of attention as what oil analysis does. Coolant is still a very vital fluid that goes through the system of that engine. So it's still one of those things, key components. If that system isn't working correctly, our engine's not going to work properly either. And that's going to, unfortunately end up with some unplanned downtime and unplanned maintenance that we certainly want to try and avoid. So that's why it's still really commonly done, because it's just such an important part of the system.
And real quick, I asked if I was the only one on the bus that really didn't know that you could have antifreeze analyzed. Is it widely known, common knowledge among our listeners out there right now?
Well, I think that's a good question. Yeah, probably is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Crickets.
I'm not alone. Thank goodness I'm not alone. All right. Well, we'll get off of that bus. And Kevin, help me out here. Get me out of this.
So Eric, tell us about it. I mean, Dave brought up some good points there. About taking samples of coolant and oil using the same tool. What are some of those problems we can see? And I know, historically myself, I have seen that in the past where the samples were a little contaminated just from the way they were collected. So what are some of those problems we can see?
Yeah, and coolant is one, especially if you're using the same instrumentation. Dirt is another one. Sometimes I'll see dirt, oil samples come back flagged for dirt, and the customer is saying, well, what's going on? How do I fix this? I'll look at the sample, and what would be indicated as dirt is high, but there's not excessive wear. It's possible that dirt just blew into that bottle while the sample was being collected or after the sample was collected. The instrumentation in the lab is extremely sensitive, and just the littlest bit getting in there can skew those results. So that's one that shows up pretty frequently that kind of scares people. But if you understand how to read the report or know what you're looking for, it's pretty easy to work your way around that. One that I see pretty frequently, and I'll be talking with some people about this today, determining, you get coolant in your oil, it says you have coolant intrusion. You got to try to figure out where it came from. So oil analysis can help you work your way there. And the example would be, if you've got coolant showing up, but you don't have any wear metals or anything like that, chances are it's not an oil cooler failure, because that would typically show up with some copper or lead. But it may be from a gasket or an EGR cooler up top, leaking down into the cylinder. So again, learning how to use these results to help sort of CSI your way around the oil sample and find where the problem really exists or started, it's pretty valuable. And another one that shows up pretty frequently, just to bring it up, fuel dilution. I see that one a lot. Modern engines have very high pressures, common rail injection systems, and longer oil drains. So there tends to be more fuel that gets in, but oftentimes it's not just fuel in the oil. The fuel's getting in there somehow. Try to figure out how. Is it the injectors? Is it the cups? Those are the most common sources. Sometimes it's just excessive idling. So you got to know a little bit about your engine, but also a little bit about your operation. How does this thing run? Are you sitting there idling a lot? What kind of fuel are you using? Stuff like that.
One of the things too that everything in use and in use for a long time is going to have some wear. In that regard, you're not going to look at one number, right? You're going to look at the trending. So you want to make sure that you have a calendar, so to speak, or a collection of oil samples, so you can see trends, right?
Exactly.
How is there? This is Dave's dumb question of the year. How many oil samples does it take to get a trend?
Well, technically just two, Dave. I mean,
okay.
If you've got one going to the next one, you can see how much something changed.
Okay, gotcha.
The more you have, the better, certainly. But
is it necessarily showing wear, or would you might have something in there that wasn't supposed to be there, like a little fuel, a little oil, a little coolant? You know what I mean? In other words, can the analysis of the numbers themselves? So we analyze the oil, then we have to analyze the numbers too. So that's where it really gets to PhD level, so to speak, in terms of, okay, is this really a trend, or is this an anomaly? So is the third oil sample the absolute cincher?
Sometimes, especially if it confirms what you were looking for. If not, it'll have you kind of scratching your head. But really what it is again, that third one, depending on whether you went longer or shorter, your drain intervals. What you want to do is find out kind of what's your normal. And once you have what your normal is, you'll start to know when it changed.
Guys, can't thank you enough as always. Part 3 of Used Oil Analysis. Byron Kelchner, Eric Arnold from Castrol, and of course our dear friend Kevin Lindsey from TA Petro. That's Maintenance Matters.